useState is a function that takes one parameter or one argument, and this is going to be whatever initial state you want your state to be. And then useState returns two things. It returns this state object or whatever, it returns this state, and then it returns a function to set that state. So you could also think of this as like a way to get the state and a way to set the state. And it can be anything. Like the type of state can be anything. It could be a number, it could be an array of objects, it could be string. And there's one important note here. Calling the set state function will trigger the component to re-render. I think at a basic level, but this is essentially what the useState hook is doing. We're just having this ability to keep track of state and also change it. But then when we change the state, that triggers our component to re-render, which therefore shows up in the UI. So that's kind of like the magic. The magic with the useState hook is this: the set state is we're able to change this state, and that automatically triggers the UI to get updated. So in our code, we can change our state, but then it also reflects that in the UI. So what we do, if I wanted if I want to have like a loader, like a spinner, I might create some show spinner state, show spinner. And then I would have a function, I could call that function X. I don't have to call these things, set. I could call that function X. Maybe, with my spinner, I would want to set that initial state to false. So when this component first mounts, show spinner is going to be false. And then if I did X, called my set state X to 99, what would show spinner be? I might throw it on mute.
99.
Yeah, 99. I think sometimes when we name stuff, especially when you're learning, the naming stuff, I think can confuse people because you think there's like some magic going on. useState is just the function whose that first thing in the array it returns is going to be the thing keeping track of the state. The second thing is going to be a function that can change that value. So if I did like a console.log y, that would be false. But then if I called this function right here, x99, and then I console.log y, that would be 99. And also this would trigger my component to get re-rendered. Calling this function, because it's going to change the state. So if I had this, if I had y in my UI, like I had a, like in my UI, ... I had that. When I first, when my component first loaded, it would be false. And then maybe like I had some click button that changed it to 99, then it would be 99 in there. So yeah, this is useState is really that's I think if you understand like this should be maybe something you almost memorize. You know, it's use state, we can pass the initial state. We have a thing. The first part of this variable we declared is a, you know, the way to get the state. And then the second thing is a function to change that state. And calling the set state function will trigger the component tree render. There's some more like, if you're like, there's some more stuff with use state, but for what we're doing, this is all we need to know. Cool. Use effect, once again, for now, for all we're doing right now, use effect is a hook. It's a function whose first argument is a function. So I don't know if you can tell. So effect, it's a function. Its first argument is a function. Now, whatever we put inside of this function, this is what's going to run, you know, when component, after the component mounts. So the component mounting is just essentially when you can see it on your website. That's what that means. When it mounts, it's like it's visible on your browser, which happens really quick. This is like a split second. But there is kind of this, you know, time where like the JavaScript is loading and like your UI is not there. It's like not on your browser. You don't notice this because it happens really quick. But nonetheless, we want to wait for that to mount. We want our HTML to be there. And then once it is, then we can do stuff. And it's whatever you want to do when your component mounts. For us, that is generally doing an Axios call. Like for now, it's pretty much getting data from a database. And we put this empty array here, so it only does stuff after mount. We'll see later that if we don't have this array here, that use effect will get called anytime our state changes. So we don't need to worry about that right now, though. Because that's actually probably, that can cause issues. Just as like a little quiz. What would be, okay, so what I just told you, the calling set state function will trigger the component to re-render. What if I try to like set state inside of here? And I told you if I don't have this extra array right here, this as the second argument, if I leave that blank, what you can do, now use effect is going to get called when the component mounts and when state changes.
You're gonna get an infinite loop.
Yeah, that's an infinite loop because within my use effect, I'd be setting state, which is going to change the state, which would actually call use effect, which would then set the state, which would then call use effect, which would then set the state. And then, yes, that'd be an infinite loop. So for now, and generally there's a lot of, like when we're getting data from the database, we just want to do that when the component mounts. So we're still going to use this a lot, this comma empty array.
Where does it say that set state triggers the use effect? Or is that just like something you know?
Set state, if you don't have this array right here and you have a use, you know, a use state function, you know, so your set state, if you call that anywhere in your app, it will trigger that function that you gave use effect to run. And that might be useful because maybe you want to do like, I don't know, maybe you want to check some state. You want to like check some stuff. So we haven't talked about lifecycle methods with React, but we have talked a lot about component when the component mounts. But maybe we want to do stuff when like the component updates. So that's like state changes. You know, maybe we have a counter that's going, you know, we don't want our counter to go past 10. So we can maybe check that state as it's while it changes. But for now, we don't need to worry about that. We're just worrying about the component mount function. But that, like, as far as we're using use effect, and we'll get more into use effect later, but next week, I think. But this is like, as you know, essentially, this is all use effects doing. We just pass it a function to run after component mounts. And we add this array. So that's the only time it runs, is when the component mounts. So it only runs once.
So whenever we do the use effect and do like, you know, call a function within it, it pops up with a warning in our console. Do you just ignore that warning, or do you actually like do something to fix that warning?
What's the warning?
I'd have to pull up a project and look, but I think I can't remember what exactly the warning is.
It might have to do with this dependency array. So for now, I would ignore it.
I think it is that. I think it says something about like remove the array or something.
Yeah, let's ignore that warning for now. And then, like I said, next week, or whenever there's a week we get more into hooks. So we'll talk about it then. For now, the warnings you can, as far as just getting stuff working and like for the hackathon, you can kind of ignore those. All right. All right, so these use state and use effect, these are like native hooks to like React. Like React wrote these hooks. So they're kind of built into React. We'll see later, we can create our own hooks, like using these custom hooks, or these default hooks that React gives us. But these are two built-in React hooks. When we get to like third-party libraries or like rewrite our own code, you'll see that people or like libraries will start defining their own hooks. And they're really nice. They're doing this, like hooks are like this nice feature that really allow people to, you know, write reusable code and kind of clean up their code. There is one rule to hooks though. Here, well, we haven't even talked about class components, so I guess that doesn't matter. I'm going to say this, I'll just say it. You have to use hooks in functional components, which is all we've learned how to do so far. We'll talk about writing components as classes, but for now we've been doing them as functions. And what I mean by as function components, like they're literally functions, function app, return JSX. That's what I mean by a functional component. So, but hooks, when it comes to other libraries might define their own hooks as a way to do something specific for their library. An example of that is use params. So with React route, and this is a hook for React router. Because with React Router, we want to maybe define, our paths, but then we might have a path that has like an ID, right? And this that can change. So this path isn't going to be invoice : invoice ID. The path is going to be like invoices 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. It's going to be an actual number, but we just kind of need to define that. Like, hey, I'm just going to call this invoice ID, but it can be anything. So let's say so this is where we're defining our routes. And then in another component, we want to actually, when we navigate there, so, there'd be like a link to invoices / yo-yo. We'd have a link component, that when clicked would render this invoice component. But I want to grab this value, because I'm not sure, like in my routes, I just call it invoice ID. So use params is the hook that allows us to do that. And this is just how, React Router has it work. So use params is a function, and then it's going to return back, a variable. In this case, use params returns back an object. And here we're just calling it params. Could call that X or whatever, but params is a good name. And then I can do params dot, and then whatever I called that thing in my route in that path, invoice ID, to grab that value. So what would this be, params invoice ID, if I clicked on this link?
Yo-yo.
Yeah, it'd be yo-yo. Params invoice ID would be yo-yo. Probably want to, like, that's probably going to be like a number though, right? Of the actual ID of your invoice. So that's how that is working.
How did so is use params just a function that knows like how to grab or how to pass params through, or how does use params like get that or keep that?
I have no idea. But yeah.
Okay, so this is one of those, it works. You can know it works. You don't have to know how it works.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's kind of like this is like, how does routes work? How does route work? Like, I don't know how those components are defined behind the scenes, but I use them. It's more, it's more like I look at their document, like React Router's documentation. This is actually pulled from their documentation. Like, here's how you use params. You define a path. You can give it a name, and then you can use the use params to grab that value. So yeah, and the hooks are nice because like just like before hooks, like if you wanted to do this, it wasn't like too bad. Sometimes you might have to do like this, where you'd have to like, when you export your component, you'd have to like export. And now I've even forgot what it's called. It's a connect. It's not connect, but it's like it's some sort of wrapper function that you have to like wrap your component in. Oh, it's with router. That's what it is, with router. And then you can have like props. And then it'd be like props.invoice ID. And you don't need the params. So there's another way, like, and actually, I don't know if this would still work with version 6. I'm sure it would, but there's a way you can like get your invoice ID with props, but then you need to like wrap it in what's called a higher order component. You wrap your component in that. So I think, and I think a lot of people would agree, that this, like the hook way of doing it, is a lot cleaner than than the other way. Cool. And likewise, so there was a question about use location. Once again, this is, another React router hook. I think, so this one you have a link. So you still have your two, whatever, some path. And then you can pass some state. Whatever. And state's just going to be an object. You can pass that as an object. So this is a way, when someone clicks this link, you can say, hey, pass this data. And then in some other components, just copy this. Let's call this some path, whatever. We can use the use location hook. And then I could do the X value. If I wanted to get this X value, I could do location dot state dot X. And if I wanted to get Y, that'd be location dot state dot Y. So that just gives me a way I can pass data from a link. So it's a little, use params gives me the way to grab the information from a URL. But maybe if I wanted to pass, more data than I just could with the URL, I can actually just pass it down through my link this way. And yeah, it's one of those things like this use location and the use params. You don't really need to know how, under the curtains, how they work, but just how to use them. It's kind of like when you're driving a car, you don't really need to know how when you press the gas pedal, it I don't know, opens up a carburetor or something, or the fuel injection system. You don't need to know how the fuel injection system works to use the gas pedal. Cool.
So the difference between use params and use location is that you're passing just a few params or one param rather than everything from a component. Is that?
No, I mean, I can pass multiple params with use params.
Right, but what's the key difference in those two?
The key difference is with use params, I'm going to be getting the values from the URL. This is when I create this link up here. I'm not going to pass it through state. I'm going to pass it through the link. So if I did this link to, I need to match this invoices. So this matches, right? Invoices, invoice ID XY, invoices 1, 2, 3. See how this path, this 2 is going to match this path. if I were to get rid of that 3, it no longer matches because there needs to be an invoices, then one thing, then another thing, then another thing. So that doesn't match. This would match. So then that would take me to this invoice element. And then I'd have params invoice ID. I would have params X, which would be 2. I would have params Y, which would be 3. With this link, I just, I could take it to some path, pass it down as state in the link. Then I use location, and then I can pull it off with the use location hook with location.state. And then I can pull any of those keys off of that object. This one, like, isn't like, I guess one difference would be like, I can send like an object or like an array. I can't do that. Like I can't have like an array in my URL or like an object. That's not going to work. So use params is generally like, you want to grab the ID or, something like that's a string or a number. State you're probably going to use if you want to send some like an object or an array down. So I definitely I think the one you want to know is the use params, because you're going to need to like grab the ID, because then that way you can do an Axios call to grab stuff. But this is just another way you could do that. Cool. So I'd say those are like these 2 hooks, use state, use effect. Once again, those are React hooks that we're going to be using the rest of the course. These use params, use location. These are more specific. These are specific to React Router, but React Router is pretty much, they should almost just put React and React Router together. It's like, I've never seen the 2 separate in like a bigger application. So cool. I think one thing that would be good for you to maybe try on your own is to see if you could write these tables. And I think there was a question with doing CRUD actions on the has many. So I think this can also be a good little thing to look at. But this might be something, to try to do on your own without looking at anything, just to see if you kind of understand, like the concept of the API and like with standard like CRUD actions. So let's say we have a things model and Rails is an API, and we're using the like API convention. What I mean by that is we're just going to append everything with API. We don't have to do that, but we are. So I have a things model and I need to like create, just kind of say what my API is going to be doing. And this is what I mean. So I think on your own, you could maybe try this later, but let's just go through this. Like if I do a get to API things, that should take me to the things controller, to the index method, and return all things. Right, and since I'm doing like standard, like CRUD actions, that's kind of why I'm trying to match these exactly. Like that should not be thing. I could make this work. I could create a route that says get API thing, take that to the thing controller, and it would return all things. But if I'm being like, I want to follow the conventions, I'm going to make that plural. So if I do a post request to API things, that should take me to my things create, and that should create one thing. Probably should say like return it as well. Or error. If I do a get to API things and then colon ID, that should go to the show, that returns one thing. And etc. for the rest of them. I think these ones are a little more simpler. Let's look at the has many, because I think this gets a little more challenging when we have nested routes. So let's say we have a sub model that belongs to a thing. So a thing has many subs and a sub belongs to a thing. So what would be the paths there? Well, I'd have a get API things colon thing ID subs. And that would take me to my subs controller to the index method. And that should bring me all subs belonging to that thing, that whatever that thing ID is. That should what it should grab me. Once again, a post to that path, that should take me to the subs to the create method. And that should create a sub belonging to, you know, the thing of the ID that was given to me. Should probably also like, you know, return sub. So if I do a get API things, thing ID subs colon ID, that should take me to my sub show, get one sub. If I do a put request to API things, things ID sub ID, and then I'll fix this, that should be update. That should take me to my update method. And that should update, you know, the sub. Really, it should update the sub with that ID that was passed. And I could like throw that in as a note, you know, the ID. This ID is the name of the sub. And if I do a delete request, API things, then the ID of the thing, sub, then the ID of the sub, that should take me to the delete. That should delete one sub, you know, to give an ID. Is this really like starting to sink in? I think this is like, it's not like the full understanding of like MVC and like, but I feel this is like that middle layer where you're really creating like the menu of your app. And if you can like kind of create this almost, I think from, I don't even want to say memory. This isn't, it's almost, I mean, there is some things you have to memorize, but with this, if you can, it's part memory, but it's also part just, you know, it's so conventional. It's, if we had like a car model, this would be a get API cars to the cars controller index method. Like there are some things I have to remember, like a get to whatever the model name is, plural, takes me to the, whatever the controller name is, index. And then I need to know like, well, in my controller, params ID is going to be the ID that's like was sent in this request. Likewise, in the has many, I'm going to get a params thing in my controller. I'm going to get the params thing ID and params ID. So the thing ID better be the ID of the thing, and the ID better be the ID of the sub. Cool. Let's kind of, I think this is a good place to kind of go into some code. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go back into the project we were working on yesterday. So let's do like maybe like the delete and just to kind of like actually review that with some code. So I think that was the mark. Okay. This. All right. I'm just going to start this up just to remind us where we left off. Hey, Mike K, did you have any more problems yesterday with your computer? Cool.
No, it seemed to work okay. I actually ended up deleting all the stuff I had yesterday and then recloning it just to start fresh. And then it seemed to work.
Yeah, you haven't had any issues.
Not since then, but I'll keep paying attention.
Yeah, and definitely tomorrow, if you're having those kind of issues with the hackathon, during the hackathon, let me know, because like right away, and I'll hop on.
I'll just make my partners do all the work.
Cool. That's a good solution too. Like, sorry, computer's broken. All right. Cool. So yesterday remember we have a bug model, and a bug has many vaccines. We've got all of our, and I can show this if we go to localhost 3001 Rails info routes. We can look at all of our routes. API bugs. See, this is kind of the, like, I think if you can kind of write this from almost memory, but not memory, but thinking about what it actually does, what these things are. Like, I'm always like at the end of the cohort when people are still confused that, how, this is getting passed in my Axios call to my controller. Like in my Axios call, there's going to be an actual bug ID here. But then in my controller, in my Rails app, I'm going to get that as params bug ID. So that's what I mean by like being able to really understand what's going on here. And I think definitely the has many is a good test because it's a little more challenging. So we have all of our CRUD actions for our bug. We can go test this by creating a new bug. Thorax. How do we spell that? Thorax. So there's our, we created it, we can show it. I don't know if there's a vaccine for this, but probably not. So, sunlight, that's a good vaccine for this. So we have a bug has many vaccines. We were able to create a vaccine for a bug, but we haven't been able to update or delete. Let me just ask you this. So I'm on this page. If I want to do, so we can kind of see some of the IDs here. What is going to be the path, like the Axios call to update? And let's say I want to update sunlight. Like, what is the actual path going to be if I want to update sunlight? This vaccine. We have like the information, some information right here. We have the ID, bug ID. And
It'd be bug /9/vaccine/11/edit.
So let's look at that. I'm just gonna throw this in some code. I'll just do this in the README. So you said bugs /
It was 9
9/vaccine
vaccines /11/edit.
/edit. So if we're doing an Axios call, what else do we need though?
/API in front of it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. We need that. We need one more thing though. Because it'd be an Axios.
If we're doing a Axios.put, then we probably don't need the edit actually.
Yeah. So remember, yeah, this one's a little tricky. So the edit, if we look at our routes, we don't even have that /edit path. But we've definitely seen that before when we're using Rails. That was the path to get back the edit form from Rails. But since Rails is no longer doing that and we're doing everything on the front end, yeah, we no longer need that. So what we need is just the put, like to tell it it's a put request. We do it here, Axios.put, and then we give it that route. What if I wanted to delete this vaccine? This same one, one sunlight with ID 1. What is the one thing that's going to change here? Yeah, the route's gonna be the same because it's still gonna be the same bug with the ID 9 and the same vaccine with 11. I changed the method. The put would also technically need something else, right? It would need the data, something to update it with. So I could send in an object, so I could change name to change, then efficacy to 20. So when I do a put request, I actually need to send along the data. So that's kind of when I was talking about that README, or when I'm talking about this routes, kind of understanding what this is saying. So I'm going to do an Axios.put request API bugs 9 vaccines 11. With that, that should go to my bugs, or sorry, this is going to go to my vaccines controller, to my update method. In my update method, I'm going to have params bug ID. What is that going to be equal to? So here's like my dev update. So this is in JavaScript. So then we, actually do the call, and then this would be in my vaccines controller.
It's 9.
So that would be 9. And then params ID would be 11. Params vaccine would be this. Name change and efficacy. So what we do, so when I hit this update method, I have params bug ID, I'm going to have params ID, I'm going to have this params vaccine. which is going to have those values. But what we do is we, just to clean up our code, we have like a set bug method that we do before all our actions. Because I could find the bug right here. I could just say, bug equals bug dot find params bug ID. But we need to do this on all of our methods. So what I do is I put this in a before action. And do that here. But my update method, before it gets called, it does have this bug ID, which will be whatever that ID is in the Axios call. And we do something similar with the vaccine where we, set the vaccine. And then, because right here, I could like do like a vaccine dot create. I could just manually do this like bug ID equals params bug ID. I could say, or not create, this would be update since we're in our update method. I could do, update the name to be params vaccine and then, name. But we do all of this, we put all of this logic in the in this set bug in the bug param or the vaccine params method. So let's go look at that. Let's go look at let's do our delete method. So let's go to our let's first start with the JS in our bugs, where it's going to be, I think it's the bug show or bug vaccines. Because here, oh yeah, we're rendering. So what we're doing here in our bug vaccine page is we're going through and we're rendering all our vaccines. So we do a vaccines.map and we're rendering a vaccine component. So that's where we're doing the name, efficacy ID, bug ID. So this is where we can do our route for delete and update. So I'm going to do a, it doesn't matter, paragraph update and delete. And then on here, I can do like on clicks. Update bug. Let's just do our delete first. On click equals delete bug. I need to come in here, set up this handler because I need to set up an on click handler. Delete bug. Let's just do a console.log. I think this can always be like a first good starting point is just hook up your handlers. So, your on clicks, just so they maybe log a message, just so you can see that that's working. So now I have this delete button or paragraph actually. Click on it. Now it's saying delete bug. Cool. So yeah, now I need to do my Axios call here. So let's just do async. Let response equal await. And this is what we just talked about, Axios dot delete. Now for this one, we like we said, it's going to be bug/9 vaccine/11. But we can't just hard code those numbers in here because this component's going to be working with mini vaccines. So we kind of abstract that. We don't say 9, we say, hey, take the whatever bug ID this is that we're pulling from props. Because when we create each vaccine, we're passing it the specific bug ID and then the ID of the vaccine. So I'm going to interpolate the bug ID. Then I can do vaccines. And then interpolate the ID of the vaccine. That way, you know, when we have, obviously, if we have we go to COVID, you know, that's going to create the path Axios.delete bugs1 vaccines1. If I want to delete Moderna, that's going to create the path for us Axios.delete bugs1 vaccine/2.
Is there any reason for the delete bug while you're defining it into a response at all? Because you're just, you don't actually have to do anything with that.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, and that's part of the reason you see it's like grayed out. It's like that's letting me know it's declared, but it's never used. I might use it because one thing I'm going to want to do eventually is, you know, when we update the UI, you know, I'm gonna need to have like a delete bug and then pass it like the ID. So I could pass it the ID from the bug. I could also do res.data. Like I could use this response.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But with delete, that might be more safe, but you know, I could also I would never expect this ID and that res.data.id to be different. That'd be a weird issue if those ever diverged. So yeah, that one I might not need to. I'm going to comment that out because that's not going to work, but. Cool. So we have my delete button. So I come in here, click delete. I could see if this is working because it's not removing it from the UI, but did it delete from the database? I could click delete again. And there's my 404. Because it did actually delete from my database. Something you could do like, you know, if you want to just see these paths, maybe just throw in that link. See, delete API 1's vaccine 7, delete API 1 vaccines 8. If you want to see what that's actually generating. So that's actually generating the numbers in there. And if I look at when I do my delete request, let's see if we can see where it actually works. Started delete API 1 vaccines 8. So that's going to grab, you know, params bug ID is going to be 1, params ID is going to be 8. And if you want to see that, Can go into our bugs controller. Could put a binding dot pry inside of here. I should do that in my vaccines controller. So now if I click delete, I probably should be stuck in my pry. Save. Oh wait, that's not down. Let's do delete. Did I delete all of these already? Let's go delete this one. Right, so I'm not hitting my pry. Oh, do I not have pry installed? I did. I do. Let's see if this is actually hitting here. It should be. Hello. Fresh. So I'm getting a 404 again. Oh, do I screw up? I think I'm at API. So I'm getting a no route matches delete API 1 vaccines 1. Was that filling the whole time? Damn it. Yeah. See, I have a bad, those were not deleting at all. Those were throwing a 404 all the time because this is not the right path, right? What am I missing here?
Bugs.
Bugs, yeah. So that's a 404 because I don't have this path. I'm trying to do an API call with API/ID vaccines. Yeah, that doesn't exist. So that's a 404. That's why I'm not hitting that pry. I thought I was getting these errors because it wasn't matching because I had deleted it, but those were not working at all. Which is why when I refresh my page, they're still there. So now when I delete, cool. Now I'm in my pry because now I have the right path. Started delete API bugs, then the ID vaccines 8. So if I do a params, see, I have a bug ID, that is 1, and then an ID, that's 8. And then going back to my vaccines controller, that's what we're doing in these methods. We're first setting, we're going to set the bug and set the vaccine. And actually, since I'm in my pry right here, these methods have already been run. So I should already here have a @bug. And I should have a @vaccine. Because I'm right here in my code, in my destroy method. And since these are before actions, these have already been run. So I now have my @bug and vaccine defined. Can exit out of there. Get rid of my pride. Get rid of that hello too. And we can like sometimes do like a puts message put, set bug called. Set vaccine called. Just to kind of see these getting called and see the order. Destroy called. So when I go delete Okay, was that, maybe I deleted that one. Let's go clear that. If I go delete one, see if we can see these. So we have my set bug called. So this is the order they're getting called in. So we get the delete request. So my controller gets the delete request. Then we call the set bug. Then we call the set vaccine. Then we call the destroy method. So I don't know, this is kind of like a roundabout way to answer this. How you do a delete is how do I have my URL? Is there Madeline, is this answering your question? Was your question more on like React? Was it more of like a React router question to get these IDs?
Yeah, I was getting errors in mine because it kept saying that things were undefined. So I must have done something differently because I just tried to fix it. And what I ended up having to do was type props dot style or props dot, bug ID would be in yours. And I don't know why I had to do that differently.
You might be missing this line.
I was about to ask, what exactly is line 4 doing there? Because you already passed props in on line 3.
Yeah, okay, because this is a good question. This is a Java, this is like a JavaScript thing. So I think to show this, what I'm going to do, let's not think about React or props. Let's just come and create a new file. I want to do this at like the root level though, like demo.js. Let's say I have a function, and I'm going to do the foo bar names. I have a function foo. We don't really care about this, what this function's doing. We're just kind of doing this is what's going on here. And then I destructure like baz and bam from bar. And then I return. I'm going to do like, this is like a little bit of a brain teaser. Well, before I return this, let's just do a console.log. Log baz and bam, so we can see these. So yeah, in coding examples, you'll see these words like foo, bar, baz, bam. They're just like made up words that like it's kind of more to like get you to think about what's going on. So they're just kind of made up names. Because it's more just trying to show you how the language works. What's going on with the language. This isn't really doing anything. So if I call this function, right, this is just a JavaScript function, right? Foo. What should foo take? Well, I pass it this variable, like this parameter called bar. And in line 2, it's destructuring baz and bam from bar. So what is bar? Bar is a object that has the key baz, whatever, that can be whatever, and bam. I run this function. So here I'm logging Baz. Baz is 11, Bam is 12. So foo is a function that takes a parameter that I'm calling bar. Line 2, I'm destructuring the keywords Baz and Bam off of here. So when I call foo, I better pass it a object that has Baz and Bam. Now Baz and Bam can be, anything. But if I do like Baz with 2 M's or Bams and I don't spell them the same way, those are going to be undefined. This right here is just ES6 destructuring. Let X equal, or like let person. So let's say I have an object, Tony, age 12. And then I can come here and I can pull those variables off like this. Equals, oh, sorry, name. The name is Tony, age is 12. I could throw this example here too. This is just ES6 destructuring. So what I'm doing is so if I take this example, I just have a function that is taking a object that I'm calling bar. I could call it X. But X better, since I'm destructuring right here, I'm kind of assuming that X is a object with the keys Baz and Bam. So that's what's going on with React. We don't call it foo, we call it whatever, vaccine. We don't call this X, we call it props. So what type of data structure is props? If
An object.
yeah, props is always going to be an object, but it's going to change what it looks like. In this case, props is an object that at least that should probably have name, efficacy ID, or bug ID. So we're just pulling those values off of that. I could do it this way. I could say const name equals props.name and go through all of these const efficacy. One thing that's different here, if I do it this way, I can actually change the names. With destructuring, they have to match what it is in the object. So that, what's going on with line 4 is just a ES6 thing. Just props as an object. I'm pulling off the name key. I'm pulling off the name key, efficacy key, ID key, bug ID. So now I have these variables defined in my code. Right
So
here.
when you're working right now in vaccine and let's say you call vaccine in your, I don't remember which one it was, whether it was your home or whichever file it was, how are you passing that? Where did you call vaccine from? How did you pass that that hash or the props to vaccine?
Right here. as ... v. Let's say if I had an object here, const person equals, age 12. And to my vaccine, I did -- person. Vaccine would now would have an age prop and a name prop. So I could with the vaccine. So I'm doing this -- v. I could say, instead of doing that, I could say name equals v.name and go through all of these. What else does that have? Like bug ID equals v.bug ID. That's obnoxious to have to go through and type all those out. So there's a shorthand for that. I can just, if the thing is an object, I can just spread out over it. So V is a vaccine. I can just spread out over those and pass each component those props, the name, efficacy, ID props. So that's what's going on there. A little bit of a shorthand, but it's a quick one. I could also pull this key ID prop off of there. Since I'm passing my vaccine a key, I could pull that off. I just want to use it here, so I don't need to. But that would be defined. It'd just have the same value as the ID actually. Does that help? Or is that still confusing?
So when you call the function in wherever you're calling it, whatever you can pass it. So for instance, in yours, you did, curly brackets, ... v, which was passing the entire hash for that vaccine. And that gets passed into the props of whatever file you're calling. And then you just pull off of those props, whatever you need for that file. So if you need a name or you need ID, you just pull it off there.
Yeah.
So do you need to pull it off, or could you just do props.id or props.
Oh yeah, okay, so you're saying vaccine.
Is that just for the looks, or does that?
Yeah, I could do props. I could do that props.name.
It just doesn't, it's just more tedious.
Yeah, it's kind of up to you. I would definitely say there's one place where I think it's better is if I'm using this ID a lot, this bugs ID, especially with URLs, this can make this a little more readable if I have to do props. This can make it's a little just not that big of a deal. It's more just yeah, it cleans it up a tiny bit. You can actually directly, if your function, this isn't a React thing, this is remember, this is a function. If the argument is going to be an object, you can just destructure right there. So this vaccine, this is a function who takes an object that has a name, efficacy, ID, and bug ID key. So you could destructure it. That's another way you can destructure right in the function definition. But I kind of avoid that because I think this is get you a little more practice with just ES6 destructuring. And like I said, this is not a React thing. This is a JavaScript thing. So.
If you didn't pass those props in, could you just do another Axios call to get the ID or the name or whatnot?
Yeah,
but for instance, if you just did vaccine, and then you called vaccine, but you didn't pass anything in your vaccine file, could you just do an Axios call?
Yeah, you could. You wouldn't probably want to though, because we already got all of it. We do the Axios call to grab all the vaccines. And then we map over them. So what if you had 100 vaccines? Then you'd have to do, you would already have all the vaccine and all the data. Then you'd have to do 100 Axios calls to get each vaccine.
Versus one Axios call and then just pass that props to each vaccine.
Yeah. But you could. That would might like, yeah, doing 100 Axios calls for each one of these, that's probably gonna would probably be a bad UX, because that would probably take even if your app is fast, it like takes 10 milliseconds and you have 100 vaccines you have to do. That's going to take like a second to load. And that's starting to get into noticeable, like there's going to be a second where your UI is glitching out. Maybe, yeah, so I would say you wouldn't want to do that if you already have all the data, which we do. That's like the whole point of that, the index method. It's like, hey, go get all of the things and then we'll render them. So it's like, so we just do one of those calls. It's not to say we can't do multiple calls at once. Like we can do, we could do 100 calls if we had to, but we just don't need to. Cool. These are good questions though. I think like these are good clarifying questions. Since we talked about use state and since we kind of talked about destructuring, I want to talk about one other thing. Let's say just a little demo, just since like object destructuring is kind of on our mind. Let's say I have a array. Let's just call this array. And this is like 1, and the second thing in the array is a function. Console.logs hi. So now I have this array whose first value is just a number and the second value is a function. So I can do just like I did with ES6 destructuring, where I use curly brackets to pull off the keys. I can do this with arrays. I'm just going to call this first and second equals array. So what I can do is I can do ES6 destructuring on arrays and pull off. So the difference between objects and arrays is it's going to go in, this one's ordered. So the first thing I defined is going to be the first thing in the array. And it's going to match the order of the array. So now if I do first, that's the first thing in the array. That was the first thing I defined. If I do second, well, that's a function. Okay, so I just got to call that function. Then that calls my function, which console.logs hi. So when we look at something like, let's see, where's a bug? Use state. And we do this syntax, const vaccines, set vaccines, use state. What type of data structure now do you think use state returns? Returns like an array like this, right? An array with the first value, which is going to be some kind of data, like a number, a string, an object. And then the second thing in that array is going to be a function. Now we don't know, we don't need to know how it works behind the scenes, but somehow this function knows how to update that thing. And that also, this function also knows how to trigger a re-render in React. But from just a JavaScript standpoint, you like from without even not knowing anything about use state or knowing very little, I can say, yeah, use state returns in an array. The first thing in the array is going to be the getter. The second thing is going to be that function that sets that. And maybe why when they defined use state, like when React was defining use state, like, you know, they could have maybe said, hey, why doesn't use state return a object? Why does it return in an array? That was like kind of a decision they made, because they had to return, you know, two things. They had to return some state and a way to set state. So why do you think they chose to like when they're designing this use state hook, they say, hey, let's return an array, because they did need to return two things. So you have to either do a object or an array. So what's the benefit with the array?
They probably wanted it ordered so it's really clear use, and then you don't have to pull off by keys either.
Yeah, the one, so that's the key. You don't have to pull off by keys. You just have to pull off by order. But what that allows you to do is now I can name my variables anything. I don't have with ES6, if it's an object, like let's say X is 1, and then Y is the function. Console.log, yo, or whatever. So if they would have decided to do it this way, and set that equal to X, and then I want to come here and I want to use the use state hook, but they returned a function. Well, now I have to call this X, and I have to call this Y. Actually, oh, I defined that X. This is good. Okay. This is bad. Let me change this. Let me just change this to state and set state. So then I could come in here. If I want to use this, I would say const. I would have to call this state, have to call this set state, and pull that off of, you know, the use state function, which let's just pretend that's called X. So then I can get state, and then I can say set state. And I can still call that function. But with use state, you know, we can use this multiple times in a function. Well, that's going to be a problem, right? Because then I'm going to have to be calling these state and set state. And then I'm going to declare those variables twice. Which I could get around. I could say like const state, you know, count set state. You know, if I wanted to have like a counter, I could rename them. Then I have count, and I have set count. That's what I'd have to essentially do with all of my use state. If I wanted to use ES6 destructuring, I'd have to like rename these variables. But if we just sign, instead, we just make this in an array. So now X is set states in an array. Now I can call these whatever, yo, yo, yo. So yo, 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 yo is going to be 1, and high is going to be the function. So they chose the array because I can just, the thing I need to remember though, I need to remember the order that those are getting returned. That's the nice thing about an object. An object, I don't have to match the order. I just have to match the name. So there's a little distinction between those two. So what type of object or what type of data structure is state? Location.state. Just if assuming this is correct code.
It's an object.
It's an object that at least has a bug key. It could have more, but it at least has a bug key. From this line right here, I could say, hey, location looks like this. It's an object that has state, and that's an object that has bug. And I can't really say what bug is right now. If I scroll down, oh, bug has a name, bug has a description. Okay, so then I could say name and description. So yeah, where I'm using like this bug.name, I could really do location.state.bug.name. All right, location.state.bug.name. But here, you know, I could just destructure bug from location.state and just, you know, grab that. Now I have this variable called bug. It's an object with name and state. And so I don't have to do this location.state.bug.name because that really does get, that can get really unreadable. There's actually a way you can do like nested destructuring. I could do this. Not name and description. And then I'd have like a name variable, but you can do like this weird nested destructuring. But I'll just, if you want to look into that, you can look on that your own. I'm going to just keep it like this. But does that kind of help? That's more like this isn't React. All of this stuff is like JavaScript stuff. So it's just doing a little more in-depth look at like the syntax of JavaScript. I think one of the ways that can like really help you kind of understand this or like try to wrap your head around this is, you know, to do like a console.log and just go in and like see what location looks like or see what these variables look like. So we have location.state. So here's my location. There's the object. And then in there is state. So I could look at state. Now state is a object that has bug. And bug is an object that has created at description ID name and updated at. So let's do this. Let's make a component, bug.js. So right, a bug is just this object, you know, it has these keys. So I can just come in here and like myself a little comment. Those are the things that like a bug has. So I can, although I haven't used this component, maybe I can say, I'm going to get this created at this description, this ID, this name, and update it at. Just grab those from props. In my div, maybe I could even do a JSON.string. If you ever want to know what props looks like, just do a JSON.stringify props. Like one of the nice things about code is you can really just go in and like go experiment, get your hands a little dirty, go explore what everything looks like. So maybe I don't even need to do this part right now. I could just like stringify props. So on this bug component, export default bug. So my bugs vaccine. Let's go use this bug component, bug. I import it. So all this bug component does right now is it just destructures props. You could almost make like a debug component that's all its job is to do. You want to see what props the component's getting, just do a JSON stringify props. Y equals 2. See, there's the props for that bug component. X is, see, that's just a object with the X key and the Y key. What if we like destructure over, I don't know, location? That one might not work. If I destructure over location, now this has the path name. So this is what location is. Path name is just an object. So now this is getting all of these props, a path name prop, search the hash, the state, which is giving me my bug, which is giving me the ID, the name, the description created at, updated at. I'm going to get rid of this X1, Y2. Let's say I want to grab the name from props. It's a little hard to read, but here's props. How would I grab COVID-19 in my bug component from props with how I'm sending it right now? What?
Props.name.
It's a little hard to see. So yeah, let's try bugs.name. If I do props, did you say props bugs.name? Or bug.name?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So here we get this undefined reading name. So what is undefined here? Bug, yeah. So props, so bug is not on props. Let's comment this out. It's not on that object. So here's props. I mean, I do have bug. I do have name. But there's one thing I need to do before I access bug, and like I said, this is hard to read. I got to grab this state key. So it's props.state.bug.name. So it's a little hard to see that state. And there we go. Name is COVID-19. So yeah, that's maybe probably a little weird to spread out over location. So if we just do something a little more simpler and spread out over the bug. Also going to need to comment that out because that's going to be in the find as well. Now my props, see how my props is just the bug. It's, you know, it has the ID key, the name key, description, created at, updated at. Because in here, I'm just spreading out over it. I can add, you know, other stuff too. X equals, you know, 1. So now I'd also have like on my props, this X prop. And then, yeah, in my bug component, now I could either destructure right here. So I could just say name, or I could also say props.name. Both works. So I really think this JSON stringify is a good function to use because it's just a really easy way to log to render a object, because with React I can't just React doesn't allow you to just render, because props right now is an object. If I try to just render, like view that on the page, I'm going to get this error, like objects are not valid as a React child. So what I can do is I can stringify it and just take that object and turn it into a string. So if you ever want to like see on your page what props looks like or what any object looks like, you can do that. Any questions with that? Let's go ahead. Let's take a break. It's, what time is it? 12. Let's come back at 12:10. I'll also stick around. I know we're doing a lot of like kind of random like examples, but I think these are, hopefully this is getting you some clarity on like just some syntax stuff.
I have a question. I was wondering if you could help me figure something out that I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, go for it. You want to share? Is it like a?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen.
Cool.
So I'm deleting, my delete button is basically, it's deleting all of the cloths in a whole category. So I don't know why that's happening. This is my only category that has things left in it. So
Okay. So your cloth is getting, I gotta move this monitor. I can't see this on my monitor. 1 second. Oh. So delete cloth. So usually this error is because like you'd be like on your on click, like line 18, you would be calling that delete cloth function that would is will so is it your and it's your cloth that's getting deleted?
Yeah, it's like all of the cloth items, not just one, seem to be getting deleted.
Okay, so can you create a cloth?
I have not built a new cloth feature yet, actually. So I could do it in Postman.
Or do you have a seeds file?
Yeah, I could just like reseed it.
Yeah, just run like a Rails DB seed. You misspelled Rails. Cool. Let's go back.
So it's not seeding it. Oh, it's because it created a new category. Okay. So and then when I click delete, well, I'm listing a lot of things. I guess. This did not happen before. No, what? I'm console.logging all these things.
That's in your style. Yeah, go to your style.js because that's where those are getting logged. Line 5.
So I was trying to do this. Wait, line 5. Oh,
Why is that saying?
I don't know why.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay. Yeah, packet style. Why is that calling? Where is that all those logs coming from?
Well, I was trying to log a bunch of stuff yesterday that wasn't logging, but I'm trying to remember where it was in. I think it was in style form. But that wouldn't matter.
Oh, go to style. Yeah, wait, no, we did go to style. Why is style? Go back to style. Line 5, there it is. You're logging props.
Oh, there we go.
Cool. And
Okay.
yeah, I would just clear your console. Hit that like the circle with the. Okay. And
Okay, so nothing is happening in my console when I just press delete.
okay, so which one did you delete?
Press Gene's delete. Okay, now it's something happened. So
Okay.
now it's not found, which means maybe that
The first time you deleted it, it worked. So if you refresh your page, I bet you Gene's is going to be gone.
no, everything. Nope, just Gene's is gone. Okay. So it's not updating my view.
Yeah. So
I
yeah,
need
looks
to
like
have a use effect going on in cloth or
yeah, because line 9. So you could put after line 9, you could do like a comment, like in the function in your delete cloth function. Like yeah, right there. Just write a comment like there's like a to do. Like yeah, remove from UI.
all right. So I need to make a use effect in order to do that?
It's not going to be a use effect. It's because you already have, so with the delete, you already have all your class. You just need to go remove them from this. You need to remove it from your UI, or you could also say that as you need to remove it from, you need to remove the cloth you just deleted from your cloth state. So that's probably in your cloths.js file. Is it? If you go to cloths.
I don't have anything in cloths.js actually. I'm generating this all through the style show.
So yeah, so see how, yeah, you have your cloth state here.
Rendering class. Yeah.
So when you render your cloths, you need to, like line 30, like you're gonna have to define a delete cloth function here that removes it from the UI.
Okay.
And then you're gonna have to pass that function down to your cloth. So here, let's just do this really quick. Line, like just do it on like line 29. Const, just make it const. Delete cloth.
But do I need to do that thing where you like make a function that deletes a single cloth and then you incorporate the delete cloth function when I get to the cloth page?
Well, this function, so this function needs to remove, because your cloths live in this component, right? Your cloth state.
Yes.
So here you could put a comment, remove cloth from cloths. Now this function should probably take like an ID. Like so line 30, because you're going to need to know what cloth to delete. So you could do that by giving it an ID.
So ID, I would have to do like const would I do const ID or just do it? Yeah, const ID equals.
No, this is where you're doing like your CRUD actions on your cloth array. Your cloth array, you need to go through your cloth array and remove that one cloth and return the new array with just that one cloth.
Cloths. Dot filter.
Yeah.
Here to look up the.
You don't need you can get rid of the parentheses because you can write this in one line.
Oh, because it's only one thing.
Yeah.
And I don't need the. Do I not need the brackets or?
Yeah, because this way you need to like this function. So the filter needs to return true or false. If it returns true, it's going to keep. So it's going to keep the cloth. If it returns false, it doesn't. So it goes through each of the cloth and it's just checking. You want to see if the cloth ID equals the ID that was passed.
Okay, cloth ID equal ID.
Yeah.
Then you want to show.
That's all it needs to be, because all this function, the filter, I think you're thinking of the map function. The filter function just returns true or false. So if the filter function returns true, it's going to keep the cloth. If it returns false, it's not going to keep the cloth in this case.
Okay.
And then the filter function itself returns a new array. So you could store that to a variable on line 32.
So would I just store that to like the whatever I want to name it, I guess, right? Like
Yeah.
cloths. So then I need to like somehow make it,
Well, you need to set your, because now you need to set your state.
yeah.
So you got to call set class. Because that just created that new array. So then that you set it with the array you just created on line 32. And that needs to go into parentheses.
Oh, I pressed command and set shift.
Cool. So now you have a delete cloth function. Oh, you need to put like a let or a const in front of line 32, I think. So this delete cloth, this isn't going to do anything yet. You've just defined this function, you're not using it.
The delete cloth one. So I need to pass that into the render class. Can I do that?
You need to pass it to each cloth in your render cloth. So when you're rendering over your cloths, when you're doing your cloth.map, that's where you need to pass it as a prop to each cloth on line 37.
Okay, so then I need to pass in delete cloth equals delete cloth.
Yeah. So now your cloth variable or cloth component now gets a delete cloth prop. It's still not going to do anything.
So now I need to go to the cloth component.
Yeah.
And I need to say,
See where you have that comment need to remove from UI. So that's what that function's doing it.
okay,
That function will remove it, but you just had to define it there because that's where your state was living. And then you have to pass it down to this cloth component because that's where the click happens. So now you passed it as a prop. So now you have props.delete cloth. But you actually named your prop lowercase c.
delete cloth.
Mm-hmm. And then what does that need? What you need to give that when you call that function, what you need to pass it.
Call this function. An ID.
Yeah. The actual ID, which, yeah.
So is it then? Well, that's our.
Yeah, that's
pass
correct.
command,
That's
so-
actually. Mhm.
But does it need to be, just regular ID, not style ID or anything?
Yeah.
Props, delete cloth ID equals props.
You don't need a, no, you just call the function. So that's going to call the function you just
Oh,
defined.
it's calling the function even though it has props in front of it. Okay.
That should work, I think.
Okay, so now it should, let me go to like something that has more than one item. Okay, awesome. Thank you. That is a lot of incorporation that I need to remember.
There's a lot of steps.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. I think, let me continue on. I think with the last part, if there's no other questions, I do want to maybe just do a little bit on styling. It's one thing we definitely have glossed over. I know maybe you've done a little of it with the prep work, but let's just talk some basic styling. Like I said, styling is definitely not going to be a big part of your grade. When we get back from lunch, we'll go over like the rubric for the hackathon, so you'll have a pretty good idea of like what you're going to be getting graded on. But let's just talk a little bit about styling. Just trying to make this look a little better. Let me share my screen. So first of all, if we want to style if we want to style a React app, there's a couple different ways. There's a lot of different ways, but I think one of the ways that you're probably going to be most familiar with is just doing CSS. So let's say if I go back to my bugs page and I have you know, this list of cards with you know, bugs with the screen outline. Maybe I want to style that a little bit. So that is in my, I believe is it my bug vaccine? Is it my bugs? It's my bugs page. So right now I have an inline style. This is a fine way to do it. I think this is going to take a little more instruction. So you can do this, but another way you can simply do this is just with CSS. So I can give this a class name. I can't normally, I would use class for CSS, but it's one of those things with JSX. I can do a class name and I don't know, like bug container. So now I'm rendering over this and I can give this a class name bug container. And then I can go, now there's a couple CSS files, app CSS index.css. These are all going to be applied globally. So you can do your styles in either one of these files. Let's just take index.css and do it here. So bug-container. And then I could do my styling here. So if I want to, like, you know, the border, 1 pixel solid black, just change it up. Now I have that. Now, that's just kind of the like how to maybe one way to with CSS class names to do that. But then also I think the other question is, well, how now that we have that, what are some things we can do to actually make this look nice? So I think there's a couple things that I think are helpful to know. I think one of them is like Flexbox. And we definitely don't have time to go over all of Flexbox, but Flexbox is definitely a nice way to align your content. So it's an easier way to, like, maybe you want to stretch things vertically, horizontally, you want to space evenly, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, I always, whenever I'm doing Flex stuff, I'm always like have like either this tutorial or like just an example up of all the stuff you can do with Flexbox. But let's kind of look at what we can do with Flexbox. And I don't know, we don't quite have enough data to really work with. So this might be hard. I mean, say for instance, I want Since these cards are kind of small, maybe I don't need these to be like, maybe I want to have like a grid of like 3 by 3. Let's try doing something like that. So what I'm going to want to do is let's wrap. So here's my render bugs function. Now my render bugs, I'm just creating a whole bunch of divs that now are going to have this class name bug container. But what I could do is wrap all of these in another div, the class name, we'll call this bugs container, plural, because this is wrapping many bugs. And then just to show this, dot bugs container, let's give this a border. 1 pixels, but we'll make it, let's make these a little bigger so we can see them. So what I'm doing now, I have that bugs container div that is wrapping all of my bug container. I can inspect my HTML. Say I have my div class bugs container. It's wrapping all of these other bug containers. So now I can make this one like display. So I'm going to make my container display flex. And what that's doing is that's now going to make them like, it's first of all, it's going from rows to columns, and then it's kind of just by default pushing them all to the start. Now, something that's nice on Chrome, this is kind of like a newer feature. It's showing here that it's flex. You can come here to your, so you got to be on your elements. You select the element with flex, and then here with the styles, you see where it says display flex. You can come in here and you can change this. And you can change any style here. Like I can remove or add the border. I can make it bigger. So this is where you can kind of come in and make some custom changes. It's not going to save it. Like it's not going to get transferred, but this can be a way you can kind of experiment a little. So with this, the Flexbox, we can use this, open this up, and we can kind of see some of the options we have. So for instance, we're justifying content normal. We could switch that if we want it to be like, if we do a center, that's going to center these things. That's the flex start, flex end. This is space between. So space between is going to, make sure there's space between them, but it's going to push them out to the edge. There's a space around, which kind of gives them padding here. So this can be a nice way to, kind of see how the Flexbox is working. There's also flex direction. If I go back to column, then that switches it back. So let's say I want to do like a flex direction and I like this like space, justify content space around. And so I can throw that in there. And refresh. One of the nice things about Flexbox is it kind of gives you this responsiveness. So it kind of gives you this built-in responsiveness. So that space around, it will kind of adjust to the size of my screen. Let's also talk, I think some other things. So that's Flexbox. There's bordered. I want to kind of briefly describe the difference between padding and margin. So let's do margin, and I'm going to make these huge just so we can see them. Margin, and actually for this, I'm going to get rid of this flex for this demo. So on my bug container, I'm going to get these margin. Let's do like 20. I'm going to make this really kind of big and obnoxious. And then I'm going to get them padding 100. Okay. So once again, I can inspect this. Go to this computed, go look at one of my like div bug containers, and I can see this. This is the CSS box model. So what I see here is I have my div. I'm looking at this one bug container. So margin is space that's given to me that gives me this space outside of that container. So I gave my bug container a margin of 20. And if I highlight over that, I can see that margin of 20. It also has a border of 3 because I gave it like a border black 3 pixel border. So that's also part of the box model. It's that 3 pixels. And then I gave it a padding of 100. And the 100 padding gives me padding. So this is within the border and the content. So it pads the content within that border. So you can think of the margin as being the space outside of the border and the padding being the space within. And then this blue area, this is the actual content. So that's these 3 things: margin, border, padding. I think those are very basic CSS stuff that you can do a lot with that as far as styling is concerned. It's just that 20. And then, yeah, maybe I can make some display flex. So now I can have some padding, a little bit of margin on there. Other things we can do. I think I really like this. Like there's a box shadow CSS generator or examples. What's the website? Sorry, I have to sneeze. There's a lot of these resources where, you can find, some styles that people have used, and you can kind of like something like box shadow. This could be a pain in the ass to try to figure out how to like create this box shadow, but you can find a page like this that has, maybe some nice box shadows, like ones done by GitHub or Facebook or Shopify. You can go in there and you can like click it, and then instead of using the border, use the box shadow. And like I said, this would maybe be a little hard to come up with on your own, but you can find some good examples. Now we have a little bit of a box shadow going on. Likewise, I kind of like to show the border just as I'm designing stuff, so I can see like the borders of my container, but you don't need that. Definitely, I think that, it's going to make it look bad. A little trick you can do, if you do a star, that's going to style everything. So I can give every element a border of 3 pixels red. This can be nice because it can show you, it's showing you that box model, or it's showing you like how much space each of your elements is taking up. Maybe I shouldn't make it red. I should do like 1 pixel like gray, so it's a little less. So let's do this. Let's say I want my nav bar to be, I like how my nav bar has no padding, but maybe I want the rest of my, like this bugs and this new bug, I want to add some margin. what I could probably do is just come in here, wrap this in a div. So I'm going to wrap all of my pages in the div minus the navbar. And I'll just make this dramatic so we can see it. And then I'll give this like some, let's maybe see what margin we'll do it. Margin 40 pixels. Now, let me ask you this question. So when I do inline styling, I say margin and I do 40 pixels in quotes. When I do it with CSS, I don't have the quotes. I don't use commas. I use semicolons. Like, why are those different?
Because that's JSX.
Yeah, this is JSX. So this is JavaScript. So if I try to do like 40 pixels without the quotes, that's like all of a sudden, that's a syntax error. So there's a couple distinctions. Like if I wanted to do like a box, or let's say something I need to use a dash for, padding dash top. Like that's how I do it in CSS. And I'd use a comma or semicolon, but this is a JavaScript object. So I need to separate my key value pairs with commas. Now, all of a sudden this padding dash top, that doesn't work because JavaScript thinks I'm trying to do math. Thinks I'm trying to subtract the padding from the variable top. So if it's a CSS thing and it has a dash, you're going to use camel casing. And then for your pixels, you got to use a string. So that's one of the differences if you're going to do inline styling versus CSS. With inline styling, you just have to remember you have to do your camel case, you have to do your pixels and strings. So but anyway, let's just give this a margin. So I'm wrapping my routes in this div with the margin 40 pixels. So now that gives all of my routes now, like the about, the bugs, the home, they're all like a new bug. They're now all going to have that 40 pixels of margin. Which, I think that can be nice. Like I said, I'm not doing that much, but I'm creating a little space. But then maybe I didn't want my nav bar to have that space. I want that to be, all the way up. So now I can just have all of those pages have that margin. Because just another thing where you can really get yourself into trouble stylistically, like, because I could try to do it like this instead of doing it like that. Like maybe I go to all of my pages, like my home page, and give that the style of margin 40. And then what other pages did I have? My about. Are you already kind of starting to see why this is not a good way to do it?
So is it better to do the CSS stuff in the with styling in the CSS folder? Would that be better practice?
Then wait, as compared to what?
Doing stuff inline?
So here's where like this is getting a little tricky. So because let's not think, I think if you choose CSS or inline styling, to me for now it's like a trade-off. It doesn't really matter. They're either like, and this would be like, I would say this like if I was like building a project, I'd be like, okay, either one's fine. But with this is a little more nuanced thing of like, So I used to have the div here in my routes, but now I'm just switching it and now I'm putting this style right here. Margin 40 pixels. And then I put it in my home, margin 40 pixels. I think this can definitely be the downside of inline styling. Because I think this is probably what you're thinking about, like, because right now I'm just hard coding that style in all of these components, right? Which is bad because, well, maybe now some of them don't have it. My home does, my about does. I think my bug form does. Another reason this can get bad is maybe, you know, you're kind of doing it by eye. So this one becomes like 50. Your home becomes like 30. Like it starts to veer off. So if I go to home, that has a 30 pixel. If I go to about, that has a 50 pixel. These type of things, I think one of the biggest things that you're going to make, that's going to make your app look good is consistency. It's, if you can make your app consistent, that I think, honestly, I think that is like the number one thing. Your padding and margins are the same. Your text is the same. You don't have like 30 different colors of purple. Like you choose a couple colors. Your border sizes are the same. Your border radiuses are the same. And that's hard to do. But one way, you know, that we can do this with inline styling is, yeah, we just make sure we're applying these styles once as much as you can. That's easier said than done, but where inline styling's fine is, you know, I only, if I can apply this style like in my app.js, right here where I'm like, do that style here. No margin, 40 pixels. Now all of this, now all of these pages are going to have that, you know, 40 pixels of margin. So let's do another thing. And because what we'll also want to do is like, can you maybe start to see how like the home, bugs, and about, they're kind of like the same component, right? They all have a header and they all have some padding. They might have some other stuff. But what we could later do, and we're not going to do this today, but we'll talk more about this now, is we can start creating React components whose really main purpose is to be like visual components. So I can maybe do like a page container component whose main job was to maybe, you know, create some space and display a header. I can maybe create a card component where all my cards have this box shadow, where they all share that same box shadow, because where else we use that is in our show. And another way, since we're doing that, we could do that with a component, but we could also just do this with CSS. But maybe for this Pfizer, instead of having the green background, I could go to my vaccine. Let's give that the class name. I'm gonna call this one vaccine container. But I could kind of have that follow the similar to this. And actually, if I wanted these to share the same style, there's CSS stuff I can do. I can like separate these by commas. So I can give them different names, but they can now share the same style. So now my vaccine container has that shadow. Maybe I don't want it to have, maybe I don't want it to be like this small card, but I can still have it share that same shadow. Yeah, if I want to, because obviously the border, once I get rid of the border, and I have some padding, all of a sudden, like I haven't done that much with styling, but it's not looking horrible, right? I mean, my forms are a ton of work, but yeah. So because one other way I could do this, because maybe I really like that box shadow. And I want a lot of my components to have that. Maybe I just make like a box shadow component. See, this is where inline styling is fine because, I could do this with CSS for sure, like I just showed you. But I can one of the nice things about inline styling is that's better than CSS is this is CSS. Like this CSS is like a dumb language. I can't write code in CSS. This is a JavaScript file. So if I want to, I can do like math, I can do functions. So inline styling has that advantage of it being like in JavaScript. We're going to talk about something called styled components, which gives us the ability to it's almost like combining both of the things. So let's see here. Make sure I put this. So I could just make a component box shadow that really is just this div. And then we can remember how we have this props.children. So let's do this with the form. So I can now, I have this box shadow component that has some inline styling. So now I could go to like my bug form. And instead of wrapping, that had that margin 40, instead of wrapping that inside of here, I could do it in my box shadow component. Need to import that. I want export.
I think you export it.
Yeah, I forgot to export it. Export default. Cool. Go back here, import it. Let's see here. Is it not? Yeah, I had that semicolon there. See, that was enough to break it, I think. So now that's wrapped inside there. And you know, maybe if I see all these similarities, and like I said, this is, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here with like, I think we'll spend some time writing our own kind of component UI libraries, but maybe I want to give this a header. And I'm going to set the header to this. Actually, I'm going to update. So I'm actually going to get rid of the header here, update bug, new bug. So now I'm giving this box shadow component a header prop. So in my box shadow, I could have this render a header. Header. So go back to my bugs form, new bug. Now it's rendering that. Style equals, I don't know, let's do like font size. Let's just make it huge. What we're kind of like the benefit of this would be, because let's say like I do the same thing with like a lot of these components where I use, now I can reuse this box shadow component. I could do like box shadow header is about. And then I can actually do like my content in here. Box shadow. Now my about page has that box shadow. It has that huge header. But, and then likewise, do the same thing with my home. Box shadow header equals home. I don't know. And this can be like whatever content, you know, stuff here. Whatever. Well, you could have a list. Doesn't really matter. Like I can make this generic where I could throw anything in here. But what I'm sharing is, you know, this container, and then I can just render whatever, but it all has like a this home, like this big header. Because maybe down the road you're like, okay, that's a really obnoxious header. Let's fix that. Well, now I just need to fix that in one spot. So I could go back to my box shadow. Let's make that like 30. And then maybe down the road, I'm like, hey, you know what? Let's make this like toggleable. So let's throw this in a div. Or let's do like a button. I don't know, button. This is where like React can like be fun. So I want to, now all of a sudden I want this box shadow component to have some state. And I'll kind of show you what I mean by this. So const, I'm gonna like be able to maybe show the body of this, whatever this is containing. So show body and set show body. Use state is false. So by default, I guess I want this to be true. And then on my button, I can say like, I can use this show body Boolean. So if that is true, I'm going to have this button say hide. If it's false, I'll have it say show. Button, and then, you know, on click. Let's do our little toggler. Set show body to be not show body. We can use this show body and props.children. This is a very like crude like toggler, but the point I want to show here is, well, let's get this working. Import use state from React. So now I can have this component that now has this functionality of being able to toggle the content. But now since I'm using this in multiple components, now that functionality is in all my components. And really, I haven't spent that much time with the UI, but it doesn't look bad, right? Because it's consistent. And I have like a nice box shadow going on and some padding. But the functionality is all like this really creates not only the consistency in the UI, but also consistency in the UX. Because now all of a sudden, ooh, see how this page is different, kind of throws you off a little. And that page is off. That like, it's not that this page necessarily looks that bad. It's going from these different UI, UXs. I think that makes it look bad. But wherever I use that component, now it all has that ability to show and hide. And it has the same style. Now, this is not trying to make these components reusable and like have them be consistent. This takes time. It's going to take practice, but definitely experiment with this kind of stuff. If you have an idea, like how could I reuse this component? You know, go try to do it. Because yeah, I could even do this like box shadow, you know, on my bugs page. Header equals bugs. Get rid of that. Oh, that looks a little bad, but what did I do here? Let's see, it's starting to like get a little better. I do that in my bug vaccines. Instead of using those divs, I can use that box shadow component. Probably don't need all that stuff anymore. I don't know. Is this helpful? Is this kind of, this is just like an intro. This is, and we're going to be spending more time with this kind of stuff next week. But now I mean, there's obviously some things like I could change here, but do you kind of see how with just like a little time with styling, and by most importantly, having these all kind of be consistent, it really looks a lot better, right? I have very little going on as far as the styling. And yeah, maybe if it's something like, you know, an A tag, we want to change our A tag, that's simple enough. Maybe we want some padding on these. And another way, like if you want to kind of, it's not really cheating, or it kind of is. I always say when it comes to like styling, be a DJ, like, you know, still stuff. Like mix it together, like do like a DJ does, like you sample other people's work. Because trust me, if you try to do your own styling, like you're not a designer. And even if you are like a designer, do the best designers do the same thing. They're just stealing ideas from other people. So style A tags, I don't know, like use Google. We'll get into like things like Dribble. Dribble's like a good place to like look at like what top designers, like their kind of UIs, what they're coming up with, like get some inspiration that way. I think, like I said this one before, Codepen. Links. I wonder if we can like find some styling for links. Just spend some time Googling. Sass. This can be a little. Like, I think this is all like A tag stuff. Let's just copy this. Throw this in our CSS. So this is like some, just a whole bunch of default styling for A tags. So now if I go back to my app, it's totally screwed up my nav bar. Guess that didn't work. Dang it. That's kind of the downside sometimes. Then you have to come in here and like try to figure out how to fix that. So that would be hover. Let's see if we can just get rid of that. Before. It's that. I'm getting a little closer, but you kind of see you can copy some of the CSS, go in, change it. Like I don't like, and then all of a sudden your app's not looking good. Your app's looking better. Now that was like 5 minutes, obviously. This isn't looking great, but not bad, right? So go in, look at, try to like get some ideas from other people, maybe find some of their styling. That's not to say like you still might have to go in and like try to figure out how to go in and change it. And maybe this is like overly complicated. Don't even think, like I just deleted all of that and I don't even think it did anything. Anyway. Cool. Questions on that? Could really change my buttons up. But so have fun with, I think this is like I said, I think this is like the fun part of, one of the fun parts of React is styling it and kind of doing like this UI part of React, trying to make stuff reusable. It's something I always like doing, like making reusable components where it's not all about the CRUD actions. You might get a little burned out on those. So. Well, sweet. I think that is it for me. Any questions? Let me push this up to GitHub. Yeah, when we come back from lunch, we'll put you into your groups. We'll tell you what you can work on, and yeah, you'll pretty much be essentially starting prepping for the hackathon. Cool. Well, y'all have a good lunch. And we'll see you back at 2.